Well, if you're watching this on your phones right now, this town hall is just right for you. Good evening and welcome to TV-Marywood's first town hall of the semester. Tonight we will be speaking with three experts who will answer a variety of questions about social media and technology. This broadcast is brought to you by the Marywood Media Group. I'm your host, Krysty O'Neill, and now I'd like to introduce our three panelists. First is Christy Adcroft, the lead strategist and president of Tribal Media, a digital marketing agency based in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Next, we have Dan Simrell, owner and creative director of a Scranton-based advertising agency, Dan Simrell Advertising. And last, but certainly not least, is Mandy Pennington, an adjunct communication art professor here at Marywood-University and NetDriven's director of internet marketing. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let's begin by talking about what social media and technology means to all of you.
Who wants to start?
I guess we could start with Christy. Let's go with this trending rhythm.
What
right
does
now.
social media mean to me? Social media, I guess, is just the reality of how people, businesses, everyone communicates in the world today. You know, we have much more control over what kind of information and stories we put out there. We don't have to rely on TV stations anymore to get our news solely on TV stations. We can get it live from the sources and at the event, time of it happening. What do you think, Dan?
To me, I mean, I think whenever there's a big paradigm shift in how people consume information, I think that there's this adjustment period, and we're in the midst of this really large adjustment period. To me, what's more exciting is the technology that delivers the message. People seem to have unlimited access to information, whatever time of day, wherever they're at. If you're in class, you're not supposed to have your phone out, but you have a smartwatch that's connected to your phone, then you could get information that way. I think a lot of the older technologies, and they're not that old, but television, broadcast radio, even outdoor media, printed media, they're all trying to catch up to the new technology. So I think technology is where it's at.
To agree with Dan, I think that technology is definitely one of the most exciting things that we get to experience right now in this era. We have this whole environment where you have these Internet of Things, where, like the smartwatch that you mentioned, all the way down to communication tools that make it easier for us to talk to our loved ones, to communicate with one another, to learn from one another. So for me, I think social media represents both an opportunity and a great responsibility for how we communicate and share information across multiple channels.
Definitely, and it's something that's clearly evident in all of your professional careers too. So our next question, it comes from Marcy Rodriguez.
Overall, do you believe that social media has been beneficial or harmful to the younger generations?
Well, I think that I'm not sure that's such a black and white question, harmful or beneficial. I think that, and when you talk about younger generations, if you're talking about grade school kids or high school kids, or even college kids, I think that, it really depends on, if we're talking about very younger, like grade school, it depends. It could be harmful to younger generations based on how their parents are helping them monitor their social platforms. But it also could be beneficial as kids get older in high school, just because they have that form of communication also as well. So I think it's actually a big question. What do you think, Dan?
I totally agree. I think it's both beneficial and it's been harmful. I feel like I'm right on the line. I'm 50, so most of the people that I know that are older than me really struggle with technology. They struggle with getting stuff on their phone, loading apps, buying things online, watching, streaming their entertainment. Most of the people that I know that are younger than me, that's all they do. They don't watch the news. They don't read the newspaper. They get everything electronically. What fascinates me is that I feel like there's an entire generation that has they really struggle with their social skills. I pick up my son and I take him to drop him off somewhere, and he's in the back seat with the girl that he's on the date with, and they're texting each other. And I just find that fascinating, that that's how you communicate. So that there seems to be this arrested development of social skills, like, hey, what's up, how you doing? That people have to talk to each other and communicate verbally and through eye contact and social cues. So that's where I think That's the biggest detriment to social media, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
How about you, Mandy?
I think just as Christy and Dan had said, that it's very much a mixed bag. You have on one side of the spectrum this amazing technology that allows for you to connect with people in a way that was never possible before, where it was so easy to be able to learn from somebody, to get mentorship, to even network for a career, for example. But then you also have the environment that we kind of see a lot of today, where it's very tempestuous. There's a lot of emotion that's wrapped up in this technology. You also have a lot of conversations that are happening in sort of a bubble, where we have created this very insulated environment for ourselves, where we can learn from each other or have these conversations, and it keeps us closed off from diverse perspectives. So I think that on one hand, it's an amazing tool, but there's a great responsibility that comes with using it. And I think, unfortunately, we didn't anticipate how great of an effect this was going to have on our society and our ability to communicate. So I think we all now recognize that we could be better about teaching people about how to use social media responsibly in order to, get the fullest benefit out of it.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely.
This is definitely a topic I think we're going to keep brushing with this entire night. But the next question comes from Katie Dearborn.
Do you think millennials being too attached to their phones causes harm to their social skills?
Wow.
So yeah, like I said, I think we're going to come right back to this. We can start with Mandy on this one, try and switch up the order here.
I would say yes. I think technology, amazing as it is, it has created this environment where we cannot allow ourselves to be bored. We pick up our phones when we're waiting in line, when we're trying to do something else, even when we're watching TV, a moment when we should be engaged in the programming that we're actually watching or consuming. So I think that it definitely has negatively affected social skills, particularly in regards to those nonverbal cues or the ability to talk to a person one-on-one. It may have helped you be a more concise writer, so I think that it can work in terms of your written communication skills in some cases, but it definitely takes away that element of being able to interact and feed off of someone else's feedback.
I totally agree. I mean, when I'm in my car, if somebody is driving badly, I say things to people that I would never say to them if we got out of our cars and we walked up to each other. I lose my temper, I could be screaming at them, but if I'm there with them physically, I would never say those things. That's what social media gives us, that gives us that false sense of courage, where we can be bullies if we want. We can say things that we, maybe we're saying it for attention. Maybe we're being a little overzealous about certain political views or how we feel about certain things. So that's the danger. That's the danger.
Chrissy?
And I just to kind of agree with what they were saying. It can be a difficult thing. It's a balance. I think that, Dan said he's 50. I'm 32. So I wasn't also, when I was in high school, we weren't talking on social media at all. We had AOL Instant Messenger and stuff like that, but it wasn't to the extreme that it is that high schoolers and college people right now are. In fact, when I was in college, that's when Facebook was just starting. I kind of refused to join it back then, actually, because I didn't want to be a part of the crowd. But little did I know, I was going to social media agency. But so, I don't even know how high schoolers are actually texting each other in the back of the car. Yeah. But obviously it can, if you're not, impede on your social skills. So
Definitely.
I agree.
Awesome, very, very great points, and there will be more after the break.
Remember the first time you picked up a basketball in your hands?
Last season, we only scratched the surface in highlighting some of Marywood's most unique student athletes.
Your passion for rugby. Well, who was your influence?
He is a man with a busy schedule.
I'm your host, Niccolo Manzo, and you're watching the Season 2 of Beyond the Arch.
4, 3, 2, 1.
And welcome back to our discussion of social media and technology. Now, we're going to switch topics a little bit and talk about social media's impact. So the next question is Tatiana Tell.
Social media and technology played a major role in recent tragic events. During the Florida shooting, students were Snapchatting what they were experiencing inside of the building, and naturally, many people had mixed reactions about this. Do you think that the use of social media or posting live videos during tragedies will help the nation see things in a different light or make matters worse?
Anybody want to attack that first?
I don't think that it can make matters worse. I think that there's situations in that, if we're talking about that particular shooting, I think there were situations where, kids were able to reach out, and maybe teachers, reach out to their loved ones during that moment. I think that it was a way for parents to try to contact their kids who were in the school. So I don't know if it would make things worse. There's the other thing of what you just said, taking live videos of events that are happening, like something so tragic like that. That's just the reality of where we are in 2018 in social media. So people are taking videos when they see anything tragic happening on the street. So you get so many different, as a consumer, as a person, you get so many different angles of what is really happening with the situation, whether it be tragic or not. So, I don't know. I don't think it could be harmful. What do you think?
I think you're not going to get the toothpaste back in the tube with this one. This is a Pandora's box. It's open, and this is the reality of where we live. You think back to when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and this guy named Zapruder shot a little 8mm camera, and that film was really the first social media live-action tragedy that was broadcast on television. It was studied, it was looked at, it was, they broadcast it again and again and again and again and again. And years later, we studied that because we are starving to look at that dramatic image. What I think came out of the most recent shooting that other shootings in the not so recent past lacked is that the students mobilized into a real social change engine, and they are bringing this message saying, we don't care what you do, you're the adults, you make the laws, you make the changes. And without social media, they couldn't do that. They could not get the momentum. It's like with all of these shootings, you're pushing a very large rock up to the top of the hill. Well, it's finally go over the top and it's gaining momentum, and I think social media will absolutely bring about inevitable change that will be good for this country and good for students.
Yeah, and I guess some people could probably argue against, and say some of the dangers of this are, the old game telephone. So if we hear there's a shooter on campus, now you have 10 tweets coming out. Oh, there's a shooter, they have an AK. So it's like you can see some of the dangers to such access to one another. So Mandy, what do you think? What are some ways to combat this?
Well, I think that this is not, in many ways, it's both a new question and a very old question. If you think about World War II and Vietnam, a lot of news organizations had a lot of big questions being asked about whether or not they should release photographs, or if the content of some of their stories were too graphic. And I think that that's something that we're also dealing with today when we think about what choices do we make on what to show or what's appropriate, or, what is the reality of the situation. And I think that it's important for organizations, media outlets, and people in general to just be aware of the power that this is going to have, and that once it's out there, it will be out there. Not only that, I think it's important for us to be, and this is kind of a bigger topic, smarter social media consumers, in that we have to be conscious of the information we're getting and its source. So, and I'm sure this is probably going to come up later on.
We'll talk about this very soon.
Later on in the conversation, but I think that we have to be very cognizant and very sensitive of the fact that even though that this is coming through an online medium, this is real people, this is real life. And we have to be able to respond to that with empathy and with compassion. And as Dan mentioned, we are now seeing a social movement of students being mobilized to make real effective change in our country. And I think that this is something that has happened before when we've had media pieces that have just been so impactful in just being released and being seen by others that it motivates people to take action. So I think that it is a really powerful tool. But at the same time, again, comes great responsibility.
Right, and I know you were just talking about World War II, releasing the pictures like that. Do you think, and empathy, do you think that this constant access to technology, is it desensitizing us? We see bombings every day, we see terrible pictures every day. What is this doing to our society?
I think psychologists would probably agree that this is a very anxiety-inducing time that we live in because of the access to information and the access to stimuli that we have. And I think that it would be beneficial for us in some moments to turn that off,
Right.
or to limit some of our exposure to it. I think it's incredibly, responsible to be well informed, but I think at the same time it can become very easy to be consumed by so much information to the point where you can't, deal with these emotions or these feelings by seeing these kinds of things in a healthy way.
Absolutely. Your thoughts?
I think the desensitizing has been going on for 40, 50 years. And it's just compounded by video games and other graphic images that we see, and our access to whatever we want to see, we want to see it. But it's not unique to this generation. There was a movie called Faces of Death when I was 16 or 17 years old. It was a VHS, it was very hard to find. And my friends were talking about it like somehow they got a copy of this and saw it. And it was footage of people dying and killing themselves. And I'm like, this is awful. Like, my choice was to not watch it, but sometimes you can't. It's like looking at a car accident. You don't want to look away. I think we're more shocked when a tragedy happens and there's not enough good footage of it. Yeah. Like, we just expect that everyone's gonna have their camera out and we're gonna see the actual event happening live in real time. It's like, think about kids who grew up during the Cold War and they would have these drills right in school, and they would set off these alarms and kids had to go under the desk. Having anxiety, school children having anxiety is not new. It's just a lot more close to home now with these tragedies and shooters coming into your school. It's a lot more acute.
Right, and you said that you had the opportunity to say no and
Right.
not see that, but
Right.
for some, they can't. I mean, some people,
Right.
a kid can walk around and see on the TV something very graphic that would have never been on the TV 10 years ago. So, Christy, what do you think, what are some ways to at least, like kind of Mandy was saying, unwind from this, maybe avoid some of the terribly graphic things, especially for younger individuals?
I think it depends on what the age of the younger individual you're talking about. I think, if we talk about kids on, maybe grade school and under, I think when you get in high school, it's a little different, but, I think it's important to, as a parent, to really have, be aware of what is being on your TV. I know that when I have two small kids at home. Now they're very small still, they're 4 and 2, but I don't let the news on in front of them. I don't let them watch the news. I don't even play it in the background when the kids are even around. We wait until they're in bed because I just don't need that to have an extra stress in their minds or be thinking about something like that. I think that can cause a lot of stress on younger kids who are developing their emotions still. And as far as social media, the same thing. I think as a parent, it's such an important thing to understand what apps your kids are on and monitoring those apps. And it's really important job as a parent to understand what's out there. So once you get older, when you're talking about high school kids, I still think that it's important as a parent, because they're still not adults yet, to understand exactly what their teens are on and trying your best to monitor, what they're viewing online. So you really,
definitely,
yeah.
Great points, guys. And stick around. We'll be right back after the break.
Remember the first time you picked up a basketball in your hands?
Last season, we only scratched the surface in highlighting some of Marywood's most unique student athletes.
Your passion for rugby. Well, who was your influence?
He is a man with a busy schedule.
I'm your host, Niccolo Manzo, and you're watching the Season 2 of Beyond the Arch.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks for tuning in to TV-Marywood's Town Hall. We're back with a question from audience member Adam Walsh.
Do you think that new social media features that let people see your whole life, like Snap Stories and Snap Maps, are an invasion of privacy in any way?
That's a really interesting question, because I think by nature, some of these features are kind of in control of the user. So you can choose whether or not you want to post a story, or you can choose if you wanted to send video or post video, for example. I think it's very much up to the user to decide how much of themselves they wish to share. Just from my own perspective, my Facebook page is publicly able to be found, and I have clients, students, parents in some cases, that all follow me on Facebook. but I am aware and cognizant of that fact. So when I post content or I make decisions about what I'd like to share, I really make sure that I'm okay with putting that out there. And I think that that's a good lesson that can kind of be applied to just about any social media channel.
What are your thoughts, Dan?
To me, it's not a privacy issue. It's about content. I feel like content drives the apps. Content drives the technology. It's what do people want to watch? Who wants to watch somebody in their bathroom brushing their teeth? Who wants to watch the minutia, the details of your life? I don't. So unless there's something in there where you really want to watch it, you want to watch the most intimate parts of somebody's life. Now there's this eavesdropping thing that for some reason, there is a whole industry around eavesdropping and watching people on hidden cameras and seeing what they're doing, and this whole Big Brother kind of a feel to it. That's driven reality television for the last 15, 20 years. I feel like translating that idea, that concept of watching everything of everybody's life into these apps, the problem is you don't have a really high-paid producer and people writers sitting around making it interesting. Twitter's a mixed bag, right? I don't want to listen to every tweet that everybody puts out there. But if Donald Trump puts out a tweet, I'm like, what is he talking about now? So it's not, to me, I agree. I totally agree with you. I think you can't put something out there that people don't want you to see. And most people want you to see. Most people are social media exhibitionists. They want you to look at all of it. And there are some people that would want you to watch 24/7, every single thing that they do. That's not for me to consume, but you can do it. I don't think that technology is forcing itself into our lives. People are just taking advantage of it.
Yeah. Christy, anything?
I think SnapMap, sharing your location could be very dangerous. I think that I have this conversation with a lot of people actually about understanding every app they join, what their privacy settings are set at by default. And going into the setting, the first time whenever I download an app, I immediately go into the settings. And what is selected by default? What are my choices here? Do I want someone to know exactly where I am at any given time? No, and I think I think that's very dangerous. I think that, sharing your location with one person, like maybe if you're on your iPhone, you can share your location with a contact, is, could be beneficial in some ways. Sometimes I do that with my sister when she's trying to find where I'm at a meeting, and I'm like, this is where it is, take a left. But a SnapMap, the SnapMap feature, I think it can be very dangerous, especially if you're not aware of that people are viewing where you are. As far as Snap Stories, they kind of cover that well. You kind of share what you want to share, and people, who want to watch your stories do, and for whatever reasons, and people have their own reasons for sharing whatever they share.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, please
Because
do.
I think that you might know more about this than I do.
Yeah.
Are there people out there that can access your webcam? And listen in on your, Alexa's always listening, right?
Have you guys seen the FBI guy memes about how there's an FBI guy
I don't
and
know.
the camera
To
watching?
me,
I don't really know.
Maybe put the Post-it note in front of the camera
I'm not sure,
just to
but
be
I am
safe.
a Post-it note person.
You are a Post-it note person.
I don't
okay,
know,
so
and I'm a Post-it note
better
person.
safe than sorry.
What do you do?
So.
You put a Post-it note over the camera?
Over the camera,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm showing my age right now. I got to get home and put a Post-it note over my camera.
Yeah.
That to me is, if that's your question, which I think that's probably more your question, then yeah, that's really creepy stuff. That is really creepy stuff.
Yeah. So to switch gears a little bit here onto the topic of fake news, which we can really only touch on. I feel like we could talk about that for the entire hour, but unfortunately we can't. In today's climate, we could probably find an opinion that Hillary Clinton is an alien. We could find 3 sources for it at least. So, in this environment where there's so many sources, some real, some not, what can we do to eliminate this idea of actual fake news, of these ridiculous sources?
Remember what your teachers taught you, honestly, because when I think back to 6th grade, I can remember there was a library class that we had in our elementary school, and I remember our school librarian talking about how do you know that something is real or credible, and talking about checking sources and looking for measures of credibility in terms of where is this information coming from? Is it shared by someone you trust? And I think that we, in this amazing technological climate, don't often take the time to consider our sources. When you go to college, you write a paper and you have to cite your sources for information. You have to say, this is exactly where I found this information. You have to establish a measure of proof. And I think that we have to be smarter in terms of our consumption habits and require these sources of information to give us these signals of proof, these signals of credibility. And there have been a lot of conversations happening about fake news in the past 2 years in terms of its proliferation, how it's kind of woven its way into our daily life. And I think that it's great that there are some organizations that are doing a lot to actually combat this. They've released materials to help people identify fake news. Facebook has taken a stand with trying to eliminate it entirely out of its platform. Twitter actually made a really interesting move in the past 2 weeks where they made an API change where they will no longer allow the same content to be distributed across multiple accounts, which is a technique that a lot of spam bots were using to distribute fake news.
Right.
So I think that what we have right now is kind of a knee-jerk reaction to something that is it's like a weed. It infiltrates your garden and it spreads, and it's really difficult to eradicate. And I think that we have to just be very conscious of all of the options that we have available. And I think everyone in the industry, especially from a content perspective, is going to be looking to see what actually works, what's going to work in terms of combating fake news. Because there's not an easy answer to that question.
Yeah, because there's always that aspect of confirmation bias. If someone wants to find something to prove it, then, hey, I found this source to do that. But what are your guys' thoughts on this?
Well, I think that right now we're in, just to further your points, I think that right now the people and the government are putting a big pushback on social platforms like Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, to figure out how they can combat fake news. Right. And she was just saying, Facebook in the past 2 months came back with a big algorithm change and how they're going to do that. And I think that there's a lot more work to be done. They need to strengthen their software that finds these bots and removes these bots. And also what they're proposing or what they have proposed to further accreditate sources needs to be stronger. I think that there's still that option in the algorithm for Facebook that when a post goes viral, it gets seniority or priority in people's news feeds because so many people are sharing it so fast. And I think that, that might not be such a good feature that needs to be, from a credible source first before they allow a post to then be spread viral. Right. But there's so many ways that people and governments and politicians and different countries, manipulate content, pictures, stories, and it's all very hard for the average user and the average person of society to really understand what is what, and that's just the reality of where we are. So I think there's a big responsibility for social platforms and especially to come up with different ways they can strengthen their software to take out, remove duplicate and fake accounts and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so do your due diligence as a citizen. So great conversation going on here, but we'll be right back after this message.
Remember the first time you picked up a basketball in your hands?
Last season, we only scratched the surface in highlighting some of Marywood's most unique student athletes.
Your passion for rugby. Well, who was your influence?
He is a man with a busy schedule.
I'm your host, Niccolo Manzo, and you're watching the Season 2 of Beyond the Arch.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks for tuning in. We're back for more of our discussion on social media and technology. Now we have another question from Kat Bischak in the audience.
Is the rise of social media beginning to become an aid in the way younger generations learn or a hindrance?
Oh, I think it's, sorry, I'm just going to hop right in here.
You go first.
I think it's an absolute aid in the way that you can get information. We were talking about fake news, and fake news is a new thing. It's not. Mm-hmm. I mean, you think about the Salem witch trials in the 1600s, right? And there was a newspaper in Salem, Massachusetts, and they would print these little stories about Mary Smith is a witch. And it was yeah, burn her, Mary's a witch, let's burn Mary, and let's have a list of all of the witches, and let's burn them all. I mean, that's about as fake news as you can get. Mm-hmm. The slippery slope with fake news, the way that you consume this information is the thing that you have to remember about human nature. When you hear a rumor, people will say, there's always a little grain of truth. There's always enough truth in the story to make you be like, maybe Mary is a witch. She does have a cat. You know, like there's always something, there's just enough to make you be like, okay, yeah, I can buy this. What happens in 99.9% of the news in America is it's a pendulum. You have conservatives and you have liberals. People who think very right-wing, very conservative thoughts, and they want to control a lot of things, and people very liberal who have very liberal ways of thinking. And that pendulum swings. It's not so much that the story is fake, it's that the story is so tinted to one side or the other depending on who's telling the story. You know, there are networks that their only goal is to push a Republican agenda. There are television networks, cable news networks, their only agenda is to push a liberal Democratic agenda. And somewhere in the middle is the truth. It's our responsibility to say, here's the information that we have. This is what I'm going to take. This is what I think makes sense. This I better check this out a little bit more for us to do our due diligence. But in terms of your generation and what you have at your fingertips, the resources, the information, I wish that I had this information when I was going to college, when I was in high school. Certain things, like just to know what song is this? And you hold your phone up to the radio. That's a resource. Like being able to quote people. You don't have to read the entire To Kill a Mockingbird. You can just say, okay, Google, find me some really good quotes from To Kill a Mockingbird. And you can get a feel for that information, and you can absorb the information that you really want, what's important and relevant to you. You don't have to take all of it. You know, you don't have to memorize the dictionary, you just have to know that there's a dictionary, and when you want to figure out a word, you go to it. That's technology, what's at your fingertips now, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. And Mandy, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. I think that it is such an aid. I remember when I was a student at Marywood and social media was just starting to gain momentum, and I was on Twitter. And I remember I participated in something that actually is still going on today. It's called PR Stud Chat. It's spelled like stud chat though, but it's a Twitter chat that happens on a regular basis that connects industry professionals with students who are studying communications, PR, advertising, and marketing. And it is a way for you to ask people directly in an environment that is conducive to conversation so that you can learn. And it is entirely dedicated to helping young students network with professionals and learn from them directly. I mean, imagine being able to go to an author of a book and ask them directly a question and then they answer it. Mm-hmm. That is the power of social media. And as a teacher, I love incorporating social media elements into my classes. I survey Twitter to get feedback from industry professionals on different topics. When I did a workshop at Marywood last year on internships and resume and portfolio building, I asked other professionals through social media, people who I was connected with on LinkedIn or on Facebook or Twitter, people I trust, to give me their insights on what they look for, or the types of questions that they might ask in an interview, or the things that they weigh out when they're looking at a portfolio. So I think you have incredible access directly to the source in some cases, and that's something that is just absolutely incredible.
Definitely. And so being at a college and having this discussion is probably important to talk about employment after graduation. So a lot of students, I bet every single student in this audience, most students here have at least one form of social media, a lot of social media accounts. And as we kind of touched on earlier, a lot of private stuff being out there. So we're kind of treading in this uncharted water, our generation, where we have so many things, our private thoughts on Twitter and some kind of maybe not wonderful pictures on our Facebook or Instagram. So as people in professional fields, what would your advice be for students that have stuff like this out there?
Well, all right. I can just say from a business owner that the moment someone asks or emails me or gives me the resume for an internship or a job, the first thing I do is look them up on their Facebook and Instagram. Now, do I stalk their profile and look at pictures they posted 3 years ago? No. But I like to get the general picture of how they portray themselves, the first impression. What is their profile picture? What is their about? That's kind of what I do. So right. I think a lot of people probably do that. I can't be the only one. So.
Oh, you aren't. I don't think you are.
I think that it's really important to understand that whatever you put out there is going to be out there forever. I mean, you shouldn't write things, say things online that you wouldn't want plastered on a billboard if that was the case, because it basically is. So I think you really have to be mindful of what your accounts, what your settings are on your accounts, and what you're putting out there public. If you are thinking that people are going to be looking at you for like, who is this person, and should they be employed at my business?
Yeah.
So.
Dan?
I think there's a lot more latitude in terms of what you put out there. I mean, it also depends on the field that you're going into. Like if you're going to go into something where you're an attorney or you're interacting with a lot of high-level clients, they want somebody who presents well. You know, you're representing the company that you're going to be working for. So yeah, if there are crazy pictures out there and you're a party animal, then people are going to be like, I'm not sure I want to hire a party animal. I want to hire somebody who goes to bed at a decent hour and gets into work on time and can handle the workload and do what I want them to do. On the other hand, if you're going into a very creative field, you want somebody that is fun-loving and is creative and expresses themselves and shows their art and shows you what they like and dislike, because they're going to be in your work environment. You're inviting them into your work family, and they better fit. And that's the best way. Like I think you talked about how you really get to sense what somebody's like. That's the best way to do it, by checking them out.
As a hiring manager, I know I always look at any candidate's social media profiles, and it gives me a really good feel on if they're going to be a good culture fit, not only for the company, but for the team and the job role that they're going to be in. And I hire social media specialists, people who have to be on social media all day. And I want to make sure that they actually understand how to use it. So I'm actually assessing their ability to do this effectively, to start conversations, to have good judgment. Because I mean, ultimately, that's what they're all looking for is, does your social media profiles, do they reflect that you have a good judgment and good character? And I think, and not to scare anybody, but don't assume that just because you have your settings on private, then no one's ever going to see it.
Yeah.
I've seen that come back to bite candidates time and time again, where even though they think it's private, somebody knows somebody, or there's always ways to be able to find out information if you really, really want to find it. So I ask that everyone exercise caution. If you are posting things that you want to stay private, it might be better to just not post them at all.
Great advice. Well, we'll be right back after the break.
Remember the first time you picked up a basketball in your hands?
Last season, we only scratched the surface in highlighting some of Marywood's most unique student athletes.
Your passion for rugby. Well, who was your influence?
He is a man with a busy schedule.
I'm your host, Niccolo Manzo, and you're watching the Season 2 of Beyond the Arch.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We're back and we're continuing the conversation on social media. Our next question comes from Ann Johnson.
With all the negatives that are associated with social media, do you think it is harming our society more than it is helping it?
Christy?
I think we touched on this a lot in different ways already, but it's not a black and white answer. Again, I think that, just like the first question was it harmful or helping our youth? I don't know if it's both. It can be both. Social media can be harmful to our society. It can also be beneficial. I think that's what she said, right? Beneficial. It can really be both. What do you want to?
It's not harmful or beneficial as much as it's changing society. Like, it is absolutely changing society. And it's crazy to sit back and watch evolution happen. It's literally happening every single day. It's changing. I'm going to make a really bold prediction. I'm going to actually go way out on a limb here and say that Facebook, which is really the juggernaut of social media, Facebook as we know it cannot continue to exist the way that we know it. And I'll tell you why. Because Facebook has become a platform for a lot of anger, a lot of political discussion. Facebook, whether it wanted to or not, because of its user base, evolved into a soapbox for people who want to rant and rave and spew some of the worst, horrible things and try to make their point and try to get you to vote for certain people. And that's not why Facebook was created. So under its own weight, Facebook is going to just implode. Facebook as we know it. What most likely will happen is that Facebook will splinter into things like Facebook for people who like puppies, Facebook for people who love apple pie, Facebook for people who are pilots. And there will be branches of Facebook where you can be more with like-minded people. When broadcast television grew into cable, people are like, this is ridiculous. Who's going to watch a 24-hour-a-day golf channel? Right. And now the Golf Network is one of the largest, most successful, huge money-making ventures that was ever done. And you see that in cable. It's cable's ability to really cater to a very specific target that makes it successful. Social media, I see social media evolving the same way. I don't want to be on the Facebook that I've been on for the last year. I'm really kind of getting tired of it. I'm sick of hearing people that I used to like that now are my enemies, that are spewing stuff about people who I might have voted for. I'm like, what do you do? What? So I don't want to be around that. I would rather just look at the puppies and the apple pies.
Right.
So as I choose the things that are important to me, and if Facebook does not do that, Facebook's going to collapse. Right. It's absolutely going to collapse.
I think we're already kind of seeing this happen. Facebook, in the past 6 months, they introduced their local platform. So they're trying to give local businesses and local organizations more power and control over the conversations that happen. Because I think Facebook is a really interesting case study in media, because you have this platform that brings together people of all interests, of all ages, of all demographics, of all geographies, of different languages. And it creates an environment where they can easily interact with one another in a way that was not possible prior to the internet. It just was not possible. And I think just to Dan's point, I think that this separation of tribes and forming of these different groups that are very specialized is a behavior that, Seth Godin called years ago. And he basically said the internet, and the reason that it expanded so rapidly and became so successful, is because it created these meeting places for people of like-mindedness to come together and share in that like-mindedness. Right. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch what the social media channels do in terms of their technology, in terms of their ad platforms, and how they target marketing messages towards us. Because ultimately, that's how they make their money. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens not only with Facebook, but with Twitter and Instagram, or whatever other ethereal social media that comes out next. Right. I think it's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, and to kind of avoid the redundancy of like, what are the good things and bad things of social media? But we've been talking a lot about younger adults using it, or even anyone really using it. But think about, if you walk on the street, you can see a 5-year-old on an iPad, or you can see them using little applications and games and stuff like that, or a kid in 5th grade with a cell phone. What are some of the implications of this with their social behavior, with their learning development?
I think that there's so many psychological studies out there right now that are saying, iPad use for younger kids is linked to ADHD, and then you can immediately read another article that says that it's not a direct link. I don't really know what the answer is. What I do know is that I don't know what iPad use for younger kids, and you're talking about that age group, is really doing, if it's causing ADHD or whatever that is, or whatever other things. But I think that, it's important to not be in front of a TV or a screen for whether you're a child or you're an adult at an extended period of time. I think that it's important, we're talking about what you just said, the 5th graders. I think it's important as a parent to really monitor their time use. So it's just like, when I was a kid, my mom would say, get out in front of the TV, just watch 2 shows, go outside. So the same thing is do I think that iPads are terrible for a little kid? I mean, I think that if the use is monitored and it's limited, just like TV screens or computer screens, any extended period of time is too much. So
yeah, it depends on the use.
Yeah,
little bit at a time. But okay, we'll be right back after the break.
Remember the first time you picked up a basketball in your hands?
Last season, we only scratched the surface in highlighting some of Marywood's most unique student athletes.
Your passion for rugby. Well, who was your influence?
He is a man with a busy schedule.
I'm your host, Nicolo Manzo, and you're watching the Season 2 of Beyond the Arch.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We're live in the studio tonight with our expert panelists. Our next topic is net neutrality, which has been in the headlines recently because of the FCC's decision to repeal it. Now our next question is Stephanie O'Malley.
Can net neutrality be saved, in your opinion?
I think so. I think we're, again, living in a very interesting time in terms of our government, and I think that there will definitely be legal challenges to protect net neutrality because it is so important, and I think that that is probably, short of Congress figuring out a way to be able to preserve it, I think it's going to be court challenges that will probably end up making it happen. Because as we've seen, we struggle a lot in this country with having bipartisan legislation.
Right.
But I really do think that it can be saved. Considering that we have some very powerful and influential companies that are heavily invested in protecting a free and open internet. Google, Firefox, and Mozilla, we have Apple, all of these companies that employ hundreds of thousands of people that influence our daily lives and allow for us to access the internet as it is. They have shaped the internet as a whole. And I really do think that there is a possibility for it to continue, but I do think that it's not going to happen quickly. I think that it's definitely going to be something that is going to merit a lot of discussion. And I think that one of the great things that's coming out of this, in my opinion, is that it's empowering internet consumers to become more informed of the legislation and policy that actually shapes their experience, because that's something that we don't often think about. When we drive our cars, we think about, things like speed limits and traffic signs. We don't think about that in terms of our media consumption. So I think that that's a really interesting perspective to take on this.
Yeah, and kind of what you were just talking about. For those that don't know, can any of you give kind of a brief description of what net neutrality is and why it's important?
I'll give you an overview. Net neutrality is one of the most misunderstood topics. It's why it became a lightning rod, and so many people are like, "Don't take away my net neutrality." What net neutrality does is it provides businesses like Google, Netflix, Amazon, people who use a lot of bandwidth to pay the same amount for that bandwidth as smaller companies who don't use as much. It basically says, we are all going to pay the same. You're going to pay whether you're using a ton of bandwidth or a little bit of bandwidth. The problem is it's driven by, like everything, it's driven by capitalism. The people who own the lines, who own the data lines, who own the fiber optic lines, who own all of the switches, who own these huge data centers where the information comes in and out, who own all the T1 lines, those people say, no, that's not fair. Netflix should be paying a lot more because they're using so much more. Now, as a consumer, it's like, well, that's fine as long as Netflix doesn't charge me more. Yeah. If what net neutrality is more between the ISPs and the big companies like Google and Netflix that are using that bandwidth. They're hashing that out. What should you be paying for how much you're using? We could ultimately end up paying the price. The hope is that we don't. That's why people are like, no, we want net neutrality, don't mess with it. I like paying $10 a month for Netflix and using as much as I could possibly use. But like your cell phone plan, Verizon says, no. It's unlimited, but once you go past a certain amount of data usage, I'm going to slow you way down. The performance of that network is going to plummet because you're using too much. So I feel like, I would love to see net neutrality continue as a consumer, but from a business standpoint, it cannot sustain itself. And it wasn't like it was always there. Net neutrality was something that was added to the business model 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It was only this explosion of streaming media that caused all of the people who own the infrastructure to say, wait a minute. We cannot do this on a level playing field. Does that make a little more sense?
Yeah, I think there's also another side to this argument too, though, in that there have been cases where internet service providers have restricted or limited content because they found it objectionable.
Right.
And that's another piece of this argument that's come into play.
That's kind of touching on like prior restraint sort of stuff.
Correct. Because we even see back in the 90s and early 2000s, we saw instances of internet service providers restricting access to concerts or access to video footage that they found to be objectionable, or they made it more difficult to be able to find certain types of content. And I think that that's part of the reason why there's so much passionate conversation around net neutrality, in that we want to make sure that we, the end consumer, don't get hurt, and at the same time we are still able to access and enjoy the internet in the way that we have for so long.
Right, and it's kind of like a slippery slope, like you said, that people are worried about. So what would be the general segment of the public that would be most impacted by this?
I think that it is even, like, to continue in on their points, I think that net neutrality is even a deeper issue than just, inflated prices, restricted content, not being able to access the same amount of information. I think that, when you look deeper into why this is happening and not just about, the ISPs making money, I think that is definitely a big part of it. I also think it has a lot to do with the government, and I think the government liking monopolies, and I think they like monopolies because they like control, and I think the possibility that the government can control, and ISPs, people could control what you see and what you say and what you do, and especially what you see online, is very scary, and it should be a scary thing as someone who is an American, to have, someone say, I'm not, like you were touching on this before, Dan, about, a lot of these organizations are pushing certain political agendas. So if some of these organizations are pushing a Republican agenda, and then all of a sudden they're having control over the content that we're seeing, that isn't such a free America anymore. So I think that it's a very deep issue.
Absolutely.
I think if you look, the competition always drives the price down, right? If there was one cell phone on the market, you'd pay whatever you'd want. Fortunately, there's, the iPhone. Look at the iPhone 10. I mean, it's $1,000. But you can buy other smartphones. Samsung's like, well, you can get more on our phone for $600. So you're like, oh, okay, all right. And then iPhone's like, well, wait a minute, we also have this other. So the competition drives the prices down. The big issue with net neutrality is that lots of communities, and I mean the majority, 65% of the communities in the United States have one internet service provider like Xfinity or whoever, or none. Some don't even have it. So you don't have that choice. They could charge you whatever they want, and they could restrict your access, and you don't have an option. And we're not there yet. Technology companies haven't built infrastructure into all of these places because it's hard to make money in the middle of Montana when you don't have enough people there to pay for it. There are lots of choices if you live in Philadelphia. If you live in Scranton, you can do Verizon for your data, or you can do Xfinity for your data, or you can do Hughes Satellite. I mean, they're very limited choices, right? We don't have a lot of choices. Yeah. So if one or both of those decide that they're going to up their rates, we can't go to somebody else to get something lower.
Right.
And that's a big danger.
Yeah, and this has been a wonderful conversation that we've had today, but we are unfortunately running out of time. So I want to ask you guys if you have any final thoughts, any takeaways that you want people to leave here with. I could start with you, Christy. Like the beginning of the night.
Do I have any takeaways? I think that my takeaway today from this discussion is just, I think it's important to inform yourself, stay informed on what's happening with net neutrality, cyberbullying, how you can, protect yourself in your privacy settings. And I think it's important to, especially when we're talking about, net neutrality, I think the most important thing you can do as a citizen is to just keep having conversations about that, reading about it and talking about it to people. That's how things change in America, and I think it's important to do that.
How about you, Dan?
The best advice that I could give you guys and anybody who's watching, and myself as well, is to really go on a digital diet and cut back on all of your digital consumption, everything, and learn how to sit down with each other and talk to each other. When you go out to eat, leave your phone in the car, because even if you put it on silent and it vibrates, it's like that Pavlov's dogs, when the bell rings, the dog's like, oh, so something's happening. Your attention is not with the other person that you're trying to connect with. And just it's common sense, it's moderation. The way that you consume media, the way that you understand it, the way that you take advantage of it, the way that you enjoy it, and you should enjoy it. Just practice some moderation.
Mandy?
I think we pay a lot of attention to the foods that we put into our body sometimes. We read the label, we look at the ingredients, we see how many calories it might have, how much sugar, how much salt. I think we have to kind of practice some of those same principles when we look at the media that we consume, and spend some time taking a look at what am I putting into my body? What am I engaging with? What am I choosing to spend my time on? And does that align with what I value? Do you value spending your time on social media this much? Do you value the conversations that you have? Or are they just, as nutritious for you as a bag of Cheetos?
Well, I want to thank you all for being here, and everyone in the audience. Thank you all for your expertise. And I just wanted to tell everybody to make sure you follow TV-Marywood on social media. For more of our programs and news, and from all of us here at TV-Marywood, stay social.